HOA sold my $500K house for $3,000 over a weed fine. I sued them for $2.5 million. I came home from a 2-week business trip to find my key wouldn't turn in the lock. There was a sticker on my front door that said property seized. I thought it was a prank. It wasn't. The Homeowners Association, HOA, had legally seized my fully paid off $500,000 house and sold it at a secret auction for just $3,000, all because I allegedly owed them $500 in unpaid fines for weeds. They stole my inheritance, evicted me, and laughed in my face. But they didn't know that their greed would trigger a RICO lawsuit that would not only get my house back, but dissolve their entire organization and land the board president in federal prison. My story begins with a blessing that turned into a curse. My grandmother passed away and left me her beautiful 3-bedroom home in a gated community in Florida. The house was fully paid off, no mortgage. It was supposed to be my financial freedom. But the community was run by an HOA board from hell, led by a woman named Brenda. Brenda was the HOA president, a woman who patrolled the neighborhood in a golf cart with a ruler, measuring grass height. From the day I moved in, Brenda hated me. I was young, I drove a truck, and I didn't fit her idea of the perfect resident. The harassment started small. I got a $50 fine because my trash can was visible from the street at 6 p.m. I got a $100 fine because my curtains were off-white instead of pure white. I paid them just to keep the peace. Then the fines became imaginary. I received a notice claiming I had unauthorized weeds in my flower bed. I checked. There were no weeds. I sent photos proving it. Brenda rejected my appeal, claiming the photos were inconclusive, and she slapped me with a $500 fine. I refused to pay it. It was a matter of principle. I wasn't going to be extorted for weeds that didn't exist. I sent a certified letter demanding a hearing. They never replied. 2 months later, I had to travel overseas for work. I was gone for 14 days. When I returned, my key didn't work. A strange man opened the door. He was wearing dirty clothes and holding a beer. "Who are you?" I demanded. "Get out of my house." "I own this place, buddy. Bought it at the courthouse steps last Tuesday. HOA foreclosure auction. Got a great deal. Now get off my property before I call the cops." I stood there, paralyzed. My clothes, my grandmother's photos, my furniture, everything was inside. I went to the police station, shaking with rage. The officer looked at the paperwork the man had provided and shrugged. "Sorry, son, it looks legal. In this state, an HOA can foreclose on your home for unpaid assessments without a judge's permission. It's a civil matter. You need a lawyer, not a cop." I was homeless. I had lost a $500,000 asset over a disputed $500 weed fine. I slept in my truck that night, watching the lights of my own house, plotting how I was going to destroy Brenda and her corrupt board. Most people think you can't lose your house if you don't have a mortgage. I learned the hard way that an HOA has super lien power. But as I dug into the foreclosure documents, I noticed a strange detail about the buyer who purchased my home for pennies on the dollar. Who was this mystery buyer, and how did a simple background check reveal a criminal conspiracy that turned a simple civil dispute into a massive federal racketeering case? I spent the first night sleeping in the cab of my truck, parked down the street from my own driveway. I watched the stranger inside my grandmother's house, drinking beer and watching my TV. The police told me it was a civil matter, implying it was just bad luck. But my gut told me this was a coordinated theft. The next morning, I didn't go to a lawyer yet. I went to the county recorder's office. I needed to know who this stranger was. I pulled the deed transfer records. The paperwork showed that the house was sold at auction for exactly $3,200 to an entity called Sunshine Property Solutions, LLC. That seemed legitimate on the surface, but then I looked closer at the signature on the LLC paperwork. It was signed by a man named Gary Miller. The name sounded familiar. I went onto Facebook and searched for Brenda, the HOA president who had fined me for the imaginary weeds. I scrolled through 5 years of her photos, and there it was. A photo from a family barbecue 3 years ago. Brenda was hugging a man she captioned, "Happy birthday to my lovely brother, Gary." My blood ran cold. The man who bought my $500,000 house for pennies wasn't a random investor. He was Brenda's brother. This wasn't a foreclosure. It was an inside job. I realized this wasn't just about me. If they did this to me, they had done it to others. I spent the next 3 days in the public records basement pulling every foreclosure file from my HOA for the last decade. The pattern was terrifying. Over the last 5 years, 12 homes in our community had been foreclosed on for minor violations like dirty driveways or unapproved mailboxes. In every single case, the auction was poorly advertised, held at obscure times, and the winning bidder was always one of 3 LLCs. And guess who owned the other 2 LLCs? The HOA treasurer's wife and the property manager's son. They had turned the HOA into a criminal enterprise. They targeted paid-off homes, invented fines, foreclosed rapidly using Florida's aggressive laws, and then sold the homes to themselves for virtually nothing, stealing millions in equity from innocent families. I finally had the ammunition I needed. I didn't go to a regular real estate lawyer. I went to a high-powered federal attorney named Marcus, who specialized in white-collar crime and RICO, Racketeer Influenced and Organized Crime Act cases. When I laid out the spreadsheet connecting Brenda, her brother, and the other board members to the LLCs, Marcus stopped drinking his coffee. He looked at me and said, "OP, you didn't just find a lawsuit, you found a federal felony. This is wire fraud, mail fraud, and racketeering." Marcus explained the strategy. We weren't just going to sue to get the house back. That was too small. We were going to file a civil RICO lawsuit. RICO is usually used for the mafia, but it applies to any organization that commits ongoing criminal fraud. The beauty of RICO is that it allows for treble damages, meaning we could sue them for 3 times the value of the money they stole. But we needed one final piece of evidence to nail the coffin shut. We needed to prove they were rigging the auctions to prevent legitimate bidders from bidding. Marcus hired a private investigator to pose as interested bidder for the next scheduled auction, which was happening in 2 weeks for another neighbor's house. The investigator went to the courthouse steps at the scheduled time, but the location listed on the legal notice was a locked service entrance at the back of the building. While legitimate bidders were waiting at the front, Brenda's brother and the HOA lawyer were conducting a whispered auction by the dumpsters in the back. The investigator filmed the whole thing with a hidden camera. He recorded Brenda's brother winning a $400,000 home for $4,500. We had them. We had the family connections, the pattern of theft, and video proof of bid rigging. It was time to drop the hammer. Brenda and her corrupt board thought they were untouchable kings of the neighborhood. They had no idea we were watching. How did we execute a surprise raid during their monthly board meeting, serving them with a federal lawsuit in front of the entire community? And what was Brenda's reaction when she realized her brother was about to turn state witness against her?
The monthly HOA meeting was held in the community center. Usually, it was a quiet affair where Brenda yelled at residents about garbage cans. But tonight, The room was packed. Word had spread that something big was going to happen, although nobody knew exactly what. I sat in the back row, wearing a baseball cap, watching Brenda hold court. She was sitting at the main table, looking smug, lecturing a terrified elderly woman about the color of her mailbox. Brenda felt invincible. She had no idea her reign was ending in 5 minutes. At 7:15 p.m., the double doors at the back of the room swung open. My lawyer, Marcus, walked in. He wasn't alone. He was flanked by 2 large men in suits, private process servers, and a videographer recording everything. The room went dead silent. Brenda stood up, banging her gavel. "Excuse me, this is a private meeting for residents only. You need to leave immediately." Marcus didn't stop walking. He marched right up to the stage, placed his briefcase on the table, and looked Brenda dead in the eye. "Brenda Miller," Marcus announced, his voice booming through the hall. "I am not here to attend the meeting. I am here to serve you, your brother, Gary Miller, and the entire board of directors with a federal lawsuit filed in the United States District Court." The process server stepped forward, handing thick stacks of legal documents to each board member. Thud, thud, thud. The sound of the lawsuits hitting the table echoed like gunshots. Brenda's face turned purple. "This is harassment. I'll have you arrested. What is this nonsense?" "It's not nonsense, Brenda," I said, standing up and taking off my cap. "It's RICO. We know about Sunshine Property Solutions. We know about Gary. We have the videos of the rigged auctions behind the dumpster." A gasp went through the crowd of neighbors. They started whispering, "Rigged auctions? Gary is her brother?" The illusion of Brenda's authority shattered instantly. The neighbors, realizing they had been scammed too, stood up and started shouting at the board. It was chaos. Brenda slumped back in her chair, realizing her secret was out. But serving the lawsuit was just the first strike. The real kill shot happened the next morning. Our strategy relied on the prisoner's dilemma. In a conspiracy, the first person to talk usually gets the best deal. We knew Brenda was the ringleader, but her brother Gary was just the bag man. He was the weak link. Marcus arranged a meeting with Gary's defense lawyer. He laid out the evidence, the bank records connecting him to the LLCs, the photos of him entering my house, and the video of the rigged auction. Marcus gave Gary a choice. Your client is looking at wire fraud, mail fraud, and money laundering. That's 20 years in federal prison. But if Gary testifies that Brenda masterminded the scheme, we will drop him from the civil RICO suit and recommend leniency to the U.S. attorney. Gary didn't hesitate. He folded immediately. He wasn't going to go to prison for his sister. Gary sat down for a deposition and spilled everything. He admitted that Brenda used the HOA software to target homes with no mortgages. He admitted they fabricated the violation notices. They literally used Photoshop to add weeds to clean yards. He admitted they deliberately held the foreclosure auctions at illegal times so only their LLCs could bid. Gary's testimony was devastating. It transformed our case from a simple lawsuit into a slam-dunk federal indictment. With Gary's confession in hand, Marcus amended our complaint. We weren't just asking for my house back anymore. We were asking for treble damages under the RICO statute. Since they had stolen $3 million worth of equity from the community over 5 years, we were suing them for $9 million. Brenda's lawyers quit. They realized she had lied to them, and they couldn't defend her against her own brother's testimony. She was alone, facing financial ruin and imminent criminal charges. The judge granted an emergency injunction, immediately removing the entire board from power and placing the HOA under independent receivership. For the first time in 10 years, the neighborhood was free. But I still had one problem. My house. Legally, the title was still in the name of the LLC, and the $9 million lawsuit was great on paper, but Brenda was hiding her money offshore. I needed a final judgment that not only returned my property, but made sure Brenda paid for every second of my homelessness. The Civil War was won, but the criminal consequences were just beginning. Brenda tried to flee the country to avoid the FBI, but she made one critical mistake at the airport. How did the FBI catch her? And what was the final massive payout I received when the court liquidated all of the corrupt board members' personal assets? The moment the court filed the RICO suit and stripped the board of power, Brenda knew her time was up. She saw her brother, Gary, walking around the neighborhood with a sense of relief, knowing he had traded her for his freedom. She decided to flee the country. Brenda, thinking she was smarter than the Justice Department, attempted to liquidate her assets quickly. She emptied her personal bank accounts and transferred millions of dollars from the HOA's reserves into offshore accounts, committing one final act of wire fraud. She booked a first-class ticket to a non-extradition island using a corporate credit card tied to one of her shell LLCs. That was her fatal mistake. The FBI was already monitoring all accounts related to the named defendants in our federal RICO suit. The moment that corporate card was used to purchase an international ticket, the flag went up. Brenda was arrested at the airport gate, ticket in hand, minutes before boarding. The images of her being escorted away by FBI agents were everywhere, finally giving the community the justice they craved. She was immediately indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. Meanwhile, our civil case moved rapidly towards final judgment. The judge declared the HOA's foreclosure of my house and all 12 others null and void, ruling the underlying debt was fraudulent. The court immediately restored the title to my name, and I walked back into my house, kicking out Brenda's brother for good. My grandmother's house was finally mine again. But that was just the house. I still needed the financial penalty. Because we had won the civil RICO case, we were entitled to treble damages, 3 times the amount of the loss they inflicted. We presented evidence showing the equity they stole, the legal fees, my lost wages, and the severe emotional trauma of being evicted and homeless. To satisfy the massive judgment, the court ordered the forfeiture and liquidation of every single personal asset belonging to Brenda and the key board members. They lost everything they had acquired through their fraud. Brenda's sprawling mansion, her luxury cars, and the cash recovered from the LLC accounts. The money she tried to wire offshore, the Justice Department seized it all. When the dust settled, the final judgment was read. I wasn't awarded the full $9 million we asked for, but the court recognized the massive suffering and the criminal nature of the HOA's enterprise. The final court order awarded me a total of $2.7 million. This figure covered the massive legal fees, my 2 years of lost income, and a significant punitive amount designed to punish the crime, not just compensate the loss. I used the money to pay off Marcus, help the other 12 families in the neighborhood recover their legal costs, and start a local foundation dedicated to fighting corrupt HOAs. The community, finally free of Brenda's tyranny, voted to legally dissolve the HOA altogether. The true victory was seeing Brenda lose her freedom, her reputation, and every penny she stole simply because she was too arrogant to forgive a $500 fine for a few imaginary weeds. The lesson? Never let an HOA or any similar organization bully you out of your property, especially when the property is paid off. HOAs have a fiduciary duty to act in your best interest. If you suspect fraud, document the pattern of arbitrary fines and contact a lawyer specializing in property rights and RICO immediately. When the system is rigged, you must bring the power of the federal court down on them. That massive civil penalty is often the only thing that gets a corporation's attention and changes the law for everyone.